This may be a ramble of thoughts, but after recently stumbling on this sub, I finally felt a place that I could offer something that my family and I experienced a few years ago that to this day gives me a shiver. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon, and felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago, my wife, daughter, and 2 German shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs who need the privacy since they are intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, just a nice horseshoe off a USFS road that had flat ground full of trees and a fire pit. The first night, my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the German shepherd, Guts, sleep with her in the tent. That whole first night, neither my wife and I could sleep, and we both heard footsteps, and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around the night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently, before departing, about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols and my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided was deer or maybe some elk. Day 2, morning. We go for a walk down the road and maybe 300 feet away, we see the circle area in the photo. I see an abandoned road where a rusted gate post, which the gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately takes off running down this abandoned road. My heart begins to race because I think it's another family camping like us, and he is going to get himself shot or scare some innocent people to death. So I chase after him as fast as I can and the rest follow. He stops after 20 feet into the road and me yelling his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that there is nobody there and something is off about the sight. I yell, "Hello? Is anyone there? Sorry about the dog." And I got no response. My curiosity gets the best of me, and I have to see what the site conditions were. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, folding table. But every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured, well, someone left in a hurry, and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, a propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, me and my daughter are playing ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have direct line of sight on her, but all of a sudden, I see Guts make a mad dash straight towards her. Normally, he would always be with me unless he's called over, and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening. So, I ran over there, and my wife starts jogging at me, and I immediately draw my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet before I call him, and he stopped. My other dog, Leah, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I have had her for 7 years, and this was the first time in her life that she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full hair raised and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah is up front bossing everything in her path and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened and she said, "I was trying to pee and all of a sudden, I felt my hairs raise. I know someone was watching me. And then I saw Guts running towards me, and I just got up to move towards you." We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything and saw no trails. Broken branches, nothing to point to what and where something went. We decide we are spending one more night since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we will be all in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put a rope with a makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck and zip-tied it so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie my last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same exact thing I have done with the rope that was so old and brown that I didn't see it at first. It was broken and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough, it was tied at roughly the same height, 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone has stayed here before and put the same makeshift warning system on the same tree I am. Maybe 10 to 15 years ago, based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure that the girls felt we are safe, and at that time, the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we are armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to that now knows that we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target so we can sleep safely. That night, we heard no footsteps, and the dogs never perked up and barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 haunted documentary, and I noticed the cluster smack dab close to where we camped that weekend, and a flood of dread rushes me as I think of that mysterious abandoned campsite with a ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since and have enjoyed the beauty of the NW, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped, and we all thank our lucky stars, Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. Just a little update. Guts is no longer with us. He has journeyed into the next phase. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him and how he saved us. He was a warrior, and his new brother Geronimo has his spirit.
The other night, my mom and I were camping in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. We were regulars down there and spend countless hours on the trails and campsites. We decided to try and find a new spot. We ended up all the way down Indian Creek on 9A, almost at the end of the road. We found a beautiful campsite. We're so excited to spend the night there. The first strange thing to happen was that I could not start a fire. I can't tell you how many times I've made a fire before. I've never struggled like this time. I went through 8 campfire matches. They're much larger and hold a fire for 15 minutes. Almost an entire box of regular matches. We had a fire starter block just to make things easier. And dry wood. It took me hours to get it going. I blame the moisture in the air that night. Things continued to get weird. Next, it's 2:18 a.m. My mom wakes me up to say there is someone outside our tent. They have been there for 5 minutes. I wake and see lights shining down into our tent. You can hear a woman's voice. We are both paralyzed with fear. We don't look out. We were down a steep hill, and the lights were coming up from the street, only about 300 feet away. The lights did not go away for another 5 minutes. Finally, the lights and voices were gone. We never heard a car leave. We were on a gravel road in the middle of the night. The nearest campsite is probably 10 walking minutes away. We would have heard a car. Finally, we fall back asleep after being spooked. 4:19, we wake up again to my mom's phone playing music. It sounds like a sad funeral song. But it also sounds like it could have been a ringtone on her phone. Neither of us have heard the song before, and neither of us have alarms set. We do not have service, so her phone is on airplane mode. She picks up the phone. The music just quits playing. She doesn't press any buttons. Her screen is still black. The song just turns off. She didn't receive any notifications from any apps. It's a blank screen. And her music app isn't playing. The next morning, I go through her phone and listen to all the different songs. That song is not anywhere on her phone. So why did this random song start and end playing on her phone? Plus, when I woke her up, she was telling me about her crazy dream of someone coming up to our tent and asking to come inside. This dream happened twice. The first dream, a woman comes up and asks to come inside. My mom then tries to grab something for self-defense, and the tent is so large, she can't get to it. The next dream, a man asks to come into our tent for just a minute. He says he will leave soon. But when she grabs something for her defense, it crumbles in her hand. The guy runs away after he sees people chasing after him. She then wakes up to the weird funeral song playing on her phone. My mom didn't know if those dreams were real or not when she woke up. She never remembers her dreams. That night was just so full of weird occurrences. If they happened by themselves, I wouldn't think anything of it. There was just so much in a 12-hour span. It truly felt like we were not wanted there. And I've never felt that at the gorge.
Hello, folks. This is a tale of something, well, that happened to me out in the woods. I hesitated if I should tell you that something happened. It did not. This was something so vague and undefined as mere feelings out in a certain location just outside our small town. I have been back to the spot several times, and this thing tend to reoccur out there. I live in a rather small town with a population of just around 6,000 people. It's in the northern part of the county that borders Stockholm down in the south in Sweden. The thing is, I've been an amateur road cyclist since the summer of 2018. I find it useful, fun, adventurous, and an entertaining way to simply stay in shape. Over the last year, my thoughts have been drawn more and more to the concept of bikepacking. ditching that road bike or getting another gravel bike, donned some overnight equipment such as tents, sleeping mats, and a portable stove, and spent a night or two out in nature. This equipment is not cheap, and I've spent the last winter months acquiring more and more of stuff that might be needed come summer. One of these things is a hammock, combined with a tarp kind of like a roof overhead. You attach these things to two trees opposite each other, and sleep hanging basically, sheltered from nasty rain during the night by that tarp. You can't just buy these things and get out of there and use them for the first time when you really need them. It's good to practice a bit first, setting things up, knowing what should be placed where and etc. So I went out to this clearing in the woods that is actually bordering a little lake outside of town. It's kind of on a hill. The lower part of the woods have this circular running path actually circulating the place that I'm talking about. I've got the things up and working, everything's alright, but man, something is not right here. There's really no other way to put it. If something happened here in the past, I have no clue. It has not, according to what information I could gather as far back as I could. It's simply just a clearing in the woods. Well, as you can see, it has got some trees standing, but part of the biggest reason undergrowth and vegetation has not filled the place is that it's bedrock underneath and a pretty shallow layer of soil. Weirder still, it looks like someone has built kind of a wooden teepee-like structure of old branches and twigs and stuff. It was an awful feeling of being stared at, basically, and not with any welcoming intent. Nothing happened to me physically, and I left safe and all, but this place is visited. Not frequently perhaps, but it does obviously happen. The shallow bedrock, is that the only reason plants avoid this place? The larger trees that do grow, why do they grow so strange? What is going on here?
In 2010, I was 12 years old. My younger brother played baseball. I would attend the summer tournaments to play with friends on the nearby playground or in the woods. My mom worked in the concession stand. My dad was a coach. One day during tournament games, I wandered into the woods farther than I had before. This wasn't a big, vast forest. It was in the middle of a suburb. Although, as a kid, it seemed massive. I found a tree house. I was too scared to explore it alone, so I went back later with friends. We climbed inside the tree house. It was everything a kid could have wanted. After a while, we got bored and left. But as we were leaving, I felt like we were being watched. We started walking away from the treehouse, and two men burst from the bushes. We were a small trio of 12-year-olds. We started running and screaming. I tried not to look back. When I did, I saw something in their hands. I just kept running. My friend who wore flip-flops tripped and fell. We all stopped running and looked back. We were so close to the field, but still hidden by the vegetation and tall grass. We were unseen by all of the adults seated on the bleachers. They caught up to us so fast. We were screaming and crying. They had hatchets. But all they said was,
"We just really didn't want you to go into our deer blind."
They looked sheepish and nervous, realizing how close people were nearby. They took off. We all told our dads, sobbing. They ran into the woods with baseball bats, combing the forest, not finding anything accused us of lying. Now that I'm an adult, I realize that was not a deer blind. It was a treehouse, deliberately put into the middle of the woods, so that children would go inside. I ask myself a lot what could have happened to me if I had the courage to go into that treehouse alone. I didn't mention this in the story, but I think it's important. We were a group of very small, vulnerable girls. Danger is everywhere for young girls.
Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, disappear, and such. So yeah, my parents were legitimately afraid for me and were against the idea. I had to lie to them that we would be staying in a hotel near the Kazia National Park so they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did. Okay, so long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers in 2 hours by train. We got our immense backpacks and everything we needed and went our way. Nothing specifically happened in the train, except the fact that the train was overly crowded, with the exception of our train compartment being completely empty. That is extremely rare for a Romanian train. I got excited, thinking that we have the whole compartment to ourselves. As I said, it is a very rare thing to happen, and of course, after 10 to 20 minutes, it got occupied by a man entering our compartment, accompanied by a beautiful German shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats and dogs in particular, and I usually find my way around all animals, even those that don't like people. But not this dog. No, this dog was otherworldly. He looked so stuffed as if it was a stuffed animal, and he would listen to his owner's every single command. I was so impressed by it, so obviously I start asking the man about his dog, since it would be a long and awkward trip to do and have it in complete silence. The man was exactly like his dog, except the commands he would give to his dog. No other contribution to the conversation. He told me the dog's name was Ucigashul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give a dog because, for this particular example, we would use the English word as it is, not translate the word Romanian and name the dog like that. But I thought, to each their own. I asked him why such a scary name, and he bluntly replied, "This dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing he likes and is good at." Now, I personally consider that the dog will grow up to have similar personality to his owner, and most of the times, I would judge people with dogs on how the animal reacts to the world and to his owner. And let me tell you guys, these two did not give a good vibe in return. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is training his dog to hunt in the woods. Then, I started thinking which woods are legal to hunt in our country. While I was thinking of that, the guy out of nowhere asked us if we were traveling to the Kazia National Park. That was surprisingly accurate, considering that the only time we mentioned the place was in the train station long before we found our seats, and way longer before we even met this man. Again, I thought it was nothing because in my country, people who happen to go in the same direction will try to make a small talk and guess where you're heading. Of course, you can just lie to keep safe of your destination or be honest, but I took the honesty route and I am judging myself for that. Never be too honest with strangers. or honest at all after you read this story. We confirmed that we are going to that place and asked what else is to see around, since he started talking about the area. And well, considering that we knew nothing about that place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals that we can encounter, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we need to climb, also advised us to visit the Lotre Shore waterfall and explore the caves behind it and to try out the local restaurant. When this guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing a pleasant memory, but he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck. Squeezing it tight, the collar made a loud clink sound. But what surprised me was that the dog made no move, no whimper, no twitch, nothing, just like a stuffed animal. Anyway, we reached our destination, say our goodbyes, and the man waves at us, and we faced against him to go on our way. I turned around back right away because I wanted to ask where exactly that restaurant was. And the man and dog were no longer there. And not just that, but also his luggage was gone. That creeped me out a bit, but who cares? We were too thrilled for our first camping experience. We start walking with our backpacks on us, 10 kilograms each, and reach a tunnel digging into the mountain. It looked amazing, exactly like those horror movie tunnels, which, if traveled during the night, would make your hair stand straight. Lucky for me, we traveled during daytime. It wasn't a long tunnel. We could see the end, but by the time we got to the middle of it, we heard a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life. We stop, and my boyfriend looks at me with this, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us," that type of face, and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog and I go right towards the sound, and in the middle of the road, I see a chubby puppy with lots of white and brown circles on his butt, crying so hard and laying on the cement looking really hurt, as if it was hit by a car. I freeze and I think to myself that our trip is over, that I must save this dog. We call for him. He looks at us, pointy ears up, gets up, and like a doofus, and starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid, and we called him Rudolph, and now he was our camping buddy. But like 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy, probably a sister, which we dragged from the nearby river. Someone threw her in the river to kill her. All wet, cold, and hungry, of course, we take her too. So here we are, 10-kilogram backpacks each, and 2 puppies at my chest, my boyfriend with a map, trying to find a spot to camp the first night. We passed by the monastery the man in the train mentioned, but because we had these puppies, we couldn't enter inside the building. The priest wouldn't allow us, so we just walked around the property, through the gardens until we reached the base of the mountain that we had to climb. I would like to mention that these puppies were 2 tiny little brats because the second you put them down and force them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts to the ground and cry. Ah, such drama. We walk and walk and walk until we decide to stop because it was getting late and I was beginning to get cold. We found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage in the middle of the woods. We call it Troyanitsa. It's like a scouting post, but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible, stuff like that inside to bring good energy to the area. It belongs to the church, It wasn't like a house. It was basically a roof with 4 small walls and an opening, not even a door you could go into, like hide from the rain or something. There was an icon inside and a Bible with pages ripped from it. Curious as I am, I opened the Bible and was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names on it, like couples do on trees. But on one particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out. It was written in red ink. Again, I thought to myself that it was probably someone who wanted to scare travelers with silly messages. I put the book back and gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, make the fire, unpack, make food and eat. We feed the puppies, which are now cuddled up in our tent, and finally darkness starts to rise all around us. My boyfriend always kept the fire up every hour because when it went off, it felt as if all the sounds in the woods were louder and closer to us than in reality. Now, it's around 12 a.m. and we are all in the tent cuddling to keep warm. The puppies wake up and start crying. I get up and unzip the tent and put them out to pee. They do, and I get them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one starts shivering. At the same time, I hear grunting from behind our tent. My boyfriend is up too, and he hears it as well. The fire is fading, and the moment he unzips the tent and steps out, the sound disappears into the woods. It sounded like a snake slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but with unimaginable speed. I ask him, "Was that a snake?" He says, up to this day, that he cannot explain what he saw. He says it was a slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies come back down after this creature runs into the woods. We try to go back to sleep after we reignite the fire, and it's 3 a.m. this time when we wake up because the puppies are being fussy again. The fire is nearly dead. We clearly have no idea how to put up a sustaining fire, we think to ourselves. So my boyfriend gets up to search for firewood, and I get out as well. I stare into the darkness, and I swear to God, I hear whispers coming from between the trees. I look up at the sky, considering it's 3 a.m., and hear birds being very loud and fluttering their wings. Now, I'm no expert in birds, but don't they usually sleep around this time? Well, these weren't. They were very active, very vocal, and very frustrated. I look at the fire and follow the red sparks popping out of it into the sky. I become fascinated with something. The spark doesn't seem to die. It goes on and on, changing color from hellish red to green. This was very out of the ordinary for me because it created an illusion that's hard to explain. It looked as if the fire sparks were going into the woods, creating a track for me, probably to follow. And I kept looking after each spark to see where it burns out. None of them did. They would levitate, turn green, and flow into the woods. At that moment, I begin to get goosebumps on my skin. The birds being agitated, the mysterious light pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us has eyes on them. Like the trunks had a distinguished shape that looked exactly like eyes. I know, this is nothing paranormal since someone explained that those shapes form when a branch is ripped from the root, and that's the shape that is left after. But there were so many, like 100 eyes, all looking at the exact spot where we decided to camp, having only that religious tiny landmark to mentally protect us. and as I inspect my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, like 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground, but I don't go near it. Suddenly, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, and half inside the bush and half outside, stares at us. I call my boyfriend and we're like, "What the fuck is that? Is it a bear cub? A wolf? A pig?" The creature shakes its head the same way a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguished clink, like a dog collar. At this time, my boyfriend manages to light up the fire really big, which scares this animal to run back into the woods, through the bush from which it initially came out of. That calms us down, but not enough to ever close our eyes again during the night. Going back into the tent, my boyfriend falls asleep. The puppies are sound asleep, but not me. I keep the zipper on the tent open a little, just enough to have my eye peek through it right at the early mentioned bush. I think I spent a solid hour staring and falling asleep to that bush. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who is now peeking through the hole in complete darkness with me. And what we see next still haunts my dreams. From the exact same bush, we see a human head popping out and looking towards our tent. Note that our peeping hole was small enough to not make it look like you were being watched from the inside of the tent. This head is slowly coming out of the bush, skin so white we thought it was a ghost. After that, a shoulder, another shoulder, a full torso, and a leg. Bit by bit, an entire man emerges from the bush, completely naked, lighted by both the moon and our fire. What he did next was excruciatingly scary for me. He comes so close to our tent and begins to remove branches, rocks, and etc. from our fire, basically extinguishing our fire by dismantling it. This happens like 2 to 3 meters from our tent. I look at the man with horror because I recognize him. And now, the clink I heard earlier from that animal is explained. It was the same man from the train with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us, and I don't know if he just went the same route as us and found us and decided to stalk us. But this guy was there since 12 a.m. at least, because our fire would be dead every 2 to 3 hours, and we would be woken up by the sound of branches being cracked, rocks being moved, which we internally explained as animals crossing the land. After he successfully managed to put out our fire, he slowly crept back into the same bush, submerging into it bit by bit, only until his head would be out, with a disfigured-looking mouth looking like a moaning ghost. You'd try going back to sleep after that. We didn't know what to do, so we just got back out, reignited the fire, light ourselves some torches, and stayed near the campfire until the first rays of the sun came up. I admit, I did fall asleep while sitting down next to the fire, and so did my boyfriend, but any sound would wake us up. I was too afraid to go near that distanced bush. I did not need any answers, any explanations. I just wanted daylight to get the fuck out of there. And we did. We packed our stuff and we got the hell out of there. We planned for a 4-day camping trip, and this experience made us give up after the first night. It was a risk that we did not intend to take. If that guy followed us, or if it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin it all. As a conclusion to my story, and an advice to any first-time campers out there, Never tell your location or even areas remotely close to your destination to strangers. You don't know where their minds take them and what they end up to do. Always stay safe. Always be aware of your surroundings and any changes that come to you under the form of sounds, movements, changes of temperature, and so on. And always protect yourself.
I'm not sure if I'm in the right place. I've held this story in for the last 6 years, because it sounds crazy. And I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive in through some rough trails. The spot we picked was next to some hiking trails that weren't very far from some natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around. We set up camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back, and had dinner. It was all very normal. Until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context as to how we slept that night, so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and a stereo that we brought in the car and locked it. I put the keys in the front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest the door of the tent with a gun next to him. We woke up the next morning and I felt fine. I had slept hard, and from inside the tent, everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown, and food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces, laying next to a tree. All of the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet, not the beautiful campsite that I saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car the night before, and that an animal got in our stuff. I promised that I had locked it, and went into the tent to grab the keys from my backpack. But they weren't there. I found them later, on the ground, right next to the car. We quickly threw everything in the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what had just happened. He finally spoke up when we were almost home, and told me that he had a dream the night before about something kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again. Said he didn't want to talk about it, and that I shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I've tried to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night.
This happened in summer of 2008. I was at a sleepover birthday party at my friend's house. That is going to require some explanation, because I live in rural western Pennsylvania, and all you need to know about that side of the state is that if you aren't living in Pittsburgh and Erie, you're probably living in an oil town that went bust decades ago. Oh, and you're probably isolated in a forest somewhere too. My family did okay in spite of the economically depressed area that we lived in. Now, my friend had money. His family weren't Wall Street investors or anything, but in a town like mine, it was noticeable. He had a big house, a huge yard, a tree house, a trampoline, big screen TVs everywhere, and every video game console ever. You might think I was only friends with this kid because of the stuff he had, but honestly, that isn't true. He was probably in the top 5 of nicest people that I have ever met, and his family is also amazing. They took me in for a while when my mom was in the hospital once, and I still keep in touch with them. So, rich guy, good guy, etc. He had a lot of friends. His birthday parties were pretty legendary among the kids in our town. Usually, they involved one of those closed canopy tents outside with movie projectors inside, along with a soft serve ice cream machine and slushy machine. The party in 2008, I think my friend was turning 14 and I was 13, was a little more low-key. There were a few less people than normal, and there weren't any tents and projectors. We played video games for the first part of the night, and then started to play flashlight tag when it got dark. I know that the rules to flashlight tag can vary depending on who's playing. My friends and I used to play it like group hide and seek. The hiders would go hide in the dark, sometimes alone, and sometimes together if there was a great spot. The seekers got the flashlights and also some cool walkie-talkies. As I said before, the yard we played in was huge, and there were a lot of places to hide. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. We mostly hid around the treehouse as well as climbing some of the trees inside the yard itself. The only thing we had to worry about was when a cop car drove by. Obviously, we weren't doing anything illegal, but we just didn't want to explain why we were sneaking around a house at 11 at night with flashlights. My friend's yard ends in some pretty thick woods. My own house, which is a couple miles down the road, has some wooded areas around it as well, but not like this. After you leave my friend's backyard, there is about 15 to 20 miles of wilderness before the next town. He does have neighbors on one side, and all of this is going to be important in a little bit. On this particular time, I was one of the seekers. My group and I were waiting in the house for the other group to hide, and we were mostly drinking slushies and messing around. We had just come out of the house and started our search when we heard a lot of yelling. Suddenly, the entire other group came rushing back to the house. They went inside, and my group, who was really confused at this point, followed them in. It took a few minutes for everyone to calm down and explain what was happening. Their story went like this. That round, they had all decided to hide back in the woods since we hadn't been back there yet. They had gone a number of paces inside, but were still in the side of the house. Looking farther inside the woods, they caught sight of a figure at the edge of their vision. It took them a little while to figure out what they were looking at in the dark. They thought it might be a tree, or a deer, or something. But they kept focusing on it. When they were sure the shape was human, they started yelling and sprinted back to the house. When everyone was finally inside and mostly settled down, I was freaking out along with some of the other boys. A few of the people in my group, including my friend who was throwing the party, were skeptical. They were pretty sure that the other group was just trying to scare us. In fact, my friend was almost angry about it. He was going to march off into the woods to check the situation out himself. And they stopped him and said that they should only go back to check as a group or to wake up his parents who were asleep upstairs. Most of the people who hadn't gone into the woods actually found this to be pretty fun in a weird way. It was like being in a thriller movie. Plus, we were in a low-crime neighborhood and there were enough of us that one unarmed person shouldn't have bothered us. and even if it was a hoax, it would be a fun scare. So we came up with a plan to investigate the woods. The majority of the guys decided to go back into the woods with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They also planned to bring my friend's dog, but that didn't work out. The dog was a golden retriever collie mix and was the furthest thing from a guard dog. Unless you feared being licked to death. He also got most of his exercise by fetching tennis balls in the big yard, so he was not used to being led on a leash. I waited at the house with another scaredy cat kid with the other walkie-talkie ready to wake my friend's parents up or to call the cops. I wasn't taking the situation very well, but didn't really show it. I tend to seem pretty calm on the outside, while I'm usually a nervous wreck on the inside. I at least attempted to calm the other scaredy cat down. After a few minutes and some excited chatter on the walkie-talkie, the investigators returned in a similar state as the original first group. There was a lot of shouting, and it took a few minutes to get the story straight. And this is what happened to them. They had gone to the edge of the woods like the original first group had done. It took a few minutes of searching since the figure had been spotted in the thicker brush that wasn't easy to reach. One of the kids had swung his flashlight around until he caught sight of something. Before yelling and running back to the house, some of the other boys who had gotten the same glimpse inside a flashlight beam behaved similarly. They confirmed that they had seen a person. He was mostly obscured behind a small tree. The features that they could make out from that brief moment were that of a male who was on the taller side with longish hair. One of the boys who had seen him thought he might be wearing some light flannel. Apparently, he had made no move to approach them and had just cocked his head out a little to stare down at them from behind the tree. It was at this point that my friend's mom finally came downstairs after all the commotion. We explained the situation to her. Afterwards, she locked all of the doors and told us to stay inside and to tell her if we saw anything else. She explained that that part of the woods that we were going into was probably not their land anyway. They just had the closest house to it. Needless to say, I did not sleep well that night. We were situated on air mattresses in my friend's game room. The really frightened kid actually took to sleeping underneath one. And just before sunrise, I finally drifted off for a few hours. When I came to, everyone else was awake and eating pancakes on the patio. My friend's mom was with them. She had checked the woods that morning and had not seen anything amiss. They were all on a little edge, but things were pretty normal besides that. When my parents came to pick me up, I was reminded of the fact that I only lived about 2 miles from my friend's house. It was a walk that took 10 minutes or less, and even at home, I struggled to sleep for a while. I just kept thinking of how easy it would be for that man in the woods to show up in my yard. Fast forward a couple of weeks later, and I'm playing video games at my friend's house again. I bring up the subject, but he was very dismissive of it. It was strange, but he was really pretty short with me. It was like he wanted me to drop it. None of his behavior fit his normal personality at all, but he did come up with a short explanation though. Apparently, one of his neighbors had a son a few years older than us. He was tall, with long hair. My friend explained that he could be a jerk and was pretty weird. The way he said weird may have indicated some mental condition. My friend's explanation was that this kid has seen us playing and hid in the woods to scare us. That did make me feel a little better at first. It did seem reasonable on the surface, and there is a good chance that's what actually happened. However, there are a few things that don't sit right with me. In my experience, when someone is trying to scare you, there's a got ya moment at the end. Like most people want to reveal that the whole thing was good-natured, or they just want to show you how dumb you look over nothing. Back when we had our sleepovers in tents, one of my friend's older brothers would rustle the outside before popping in to see if he had scared us. Both of his brothers had moved out of the house by the night of the incident. This person in the woods did nothing like that. He may have just been trying to scare us and went all in on the whole thing, wherein his only pleasure was knowing that he scarred us for life. Or, if this kid really did have problems, maybe he just didn't understand how pranks typically went. His explanation also brought back an old memory of mine. I had been going to my friend's house for close to 10 years at that point. In one of the early years, I remember playing a game with my friend and one of his neighbors who lived across the street. Both my friend and the neighbor had crabapple trees in their yards. We played a game of basically dodgeball with moldy apples thrown across the road. The game ended when the neighbor, who was a few years older, chucked a crabapple at my friend's head as hard as he could. It absolutely nailed my friend, and he was on the ground crying. I brought him inside where his parents asked me what was wrong, and I told him about the game and the neighbor kid. When he had finished crying, his parents scolded him and said that they had warned him about this kid. They just said that the neighbor's kid was not nice. For the record, he did not have long hair, but this was a number of years prior to the incident. Now, I don't know if this was the neighbor that my friend had pinned the blame on, which brings me to some other disturbing things. My friend never gave me the suspect's name, even when I pressed him on it. More unsettling was the fact that my friend was not among the kids who had actually seen the guy directly. This was just his explanation for what happened. I don't think my friend was actually trying to cover anything. I think he was just worried that I wouldn't want to come to his house anymore if I didn't feel safe. That was the last time that I had a sleepover at my friend's house. That wasn't really because of the incident, but because we were entering high school and overnight parties started meaning something else entirely. My friend's explanation does seem plausible, and that makes a pretty creepy story on its own. The alternatives are even more frightening. I don't even want to think about what kind of guys go stalk teenagers in the woods in the middle of the night. So, whether you were a creepy neighbor or a creepy mystery person, let's not meet. When I was a little girl, I lived in an apartment complex with my mother. The entire complex consisted of 2 buildings that sat side by side, less than 100 feet apart, with 4 2-bedroom flats, 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs. We lived about 100 yards down the hill from a major 5-lane road, but you would have never known due to the thick woods that bordered the complex on 3 sides. The last side was an area cut for power lines that ran next to our driveway with a graveyard directly beyond it. It should go without saying that this setup was a recipe for many childish shenanigans, as well as creepy encounters. On the front side of the complex and along the power line side were thick blackberry brambles. They weren't quite as thick along the power line area, but in the front of the apartment, You couldn't stick your arm in without being torn apart by the thorns, and it was so thick it was nearly impossible to push through. This will be relevant later. I was the only young child that lived there full time, and all the neighbors were, to the best of my knowledge, fond of me. I was active in Girl Scout, so when it was time, I would go around to all the neighbors for orders. When the cookies came in, I'd get my little wagon and deliver them to the neighbors by myself because my mother knew and trusted them. The day this happened, I had taken my wagon to the other building to deliver cookies. I hadn't meant to stay as long as I had, but my mother's friend's husband had bought some new fish. I was fascinated with their aquarium, so I had spent about 45 minutes helping them pick out names. When I began to walk back, dusk had fallen. I had walked about 7 steps off their porch when I got a bad feeling. And now that I'm older, I understand I'm an empath and have learned to listen to my intuition. But back then, I just thought I had to poo, like bad. I stopped for a second to settle my stomach and heard a noise. When I looked to the front of the apartments where the blackberries were the most thick, initially I couldn't see anything. I forget exactly what alerted me to his presence, but I think he flicked a lighter or something. It was like he was trying to purposely alert me to his presence. The second I saw him, I froze. He had a shoulder-length stringy black hair, bad skin, and looked like a skeleton. He was so skinny. Knowing what I know now, I imagine he was probably strung out. I realized when he knew I saw him because his face split in a wicked and not at all friendly grin. Then he began tearing his way through the blackberry brambles towards me. I began running towards my house while screaming bloody murder. Even over my screams, I heard his feet slap the pavement behind me. I got to my steps, and my Uncle Mike, who lived next door, flung his door open to see what the hell was going on. And I began screaming and crying about the man that had chased me out of the woods. But the man had disappeared. Mike hadn't seen him, so initially he thought that I let my imagination run away with me. But when they looked at the area that I said he'd emerged from, there was a clear area of broken brush and blood from where he'd been cut by the thorns. After they took their machete to cut away the brambles and investigate where he'd come from, they discovered an area he'd been standing in with a small pile of cigarette butts, like he stood there waiting for me when he saw me walk across initially. A few weeks later, deeper in the woods, my mother's boyfriend and I discovered a small tent with assorted paraphernalia and very disturbing porn. No one mentioned the connection, but I was very mature for my age, so when I thought about it, it disturbed me very much. So, disturbing stranger that departed your fuck tent to watch me from the woods, let's not meet again.
Okay, so I remember another story for you. But it happened to my husband, and fiancé at the time. We used to live in a neighborhood that had a dirt trail that ran behind several neighborhoods, ending up at a pathed wooded area that led into a shopping center. My husband and I would run it together sometimes with 2 of our dogs, and he would also run it alone as well with 1. One day he was running it with our dog Lily, who was a pit lab mix, about 60 pounds. When he hits the paved part of the run, all of a sudden this big Rottweiler comes out of nowhere and charges them while snarling. My husband was able to react quick and kick the dog right in the face, and it sent him sprawling. Lily started to square up because while she loves dogs, she isn't afraid to go after one that isn't friendly. So as the Rottweiler's starting to get up and getting his feet right, my husband starts dragging Lily away back to the dirt trail to get home. As he's doing this, he noticed a man standing roughly 10 feet off the paved path in the woods. Just standing there, watching everything unfold. Not calling his dog back, not saying a damned word. Just standing there. It was probably about 6'2" and largely built. Luckily, my husband got back unharmed and told me what happened. First thing that came to my mind was, that's suspicious as fuck. We called the police and drove down to the shopping center. I took a bat just in case, but basically my logic was I didn't want anybody going down the path until the police searched it. All in all, it probably took my husband 10 minutes to get home after the encounter, and 5 minutes to drive there. But the guy was gone, as was his dog. I stopped a lady and her dog from going down to the paved path, and came across 2 men pushing a baby stroller and warned them as well. I couldn't imagine that poor dog or baby being mauled. In my mind, this dude was up to no good. There's no reason to unleash your dog there, especially one that isn't trained. And there's absolutely no reason to be lurking in the woods 10 feet off the path. I definitely feel he was hoping his dog would distract someone and then he could attack them and they would never see it coming. I don't know what he wanted, but I can tell you he was not expecting my husband to kick his dog in the face and send it sprawling, or for him to have a dog ready to square the fuck up against his. Police searched, but like I said, he was gone. So they just issued an alert throughout the area to be careful and not walk or run alone.
About 15 years ago, I lived in Sulphur, Oklahoma. My playground? The Chickasaw National Recreation Area. I loved that park so much, and I rode more miles on my bike than anywhere else. I've walked nearly every trail and rode every road. Every day, I would ride my mountain bike up and down the trails and would be home by nightfall most days. One night, however, I had rode out a bit further than usual, and on my way back, however, I decided to ride the trail from an area known as Buffalo Springs, where they have live buffalo roam, and there is a large spring or fountain there for all to enjoy. As I was riding back, I knew the end of the trail was coming up, and I would have to cross a stone bridge across the creek, then up the road to my home. It was dark at this time, and all I had to use to see was the full moon. I was maybe a few hundred yards from it when I got a sharp in my left thigh. I stopped and looked around to see what just hit me. Then I heard a noise, sounding like something hitting the ground hard in front of me. There was a rock, about the size of a baseball, rolling across the trail. Me, confused, starts to look up the side of this hill. And just as I turn my head to look, I almost fall off my bike when another rock comes flying down and hitting my front wheel. I finally have my eyes adjust to look at someone very tall and dark and covered in hair at the top of the hill throwing things at me and screaming. I yelled that I had a cell phone and that I was going to call the police. I didn't actually have one, as I didn't have a cell phone yet. This seemed to have pissed it or him off, and he started charging down the hill at me. I, for obvious reasons, light up bike and took off. Just as I crossed the bridge, I heard a huge splashing noise in the creek and seen it was a large rock that had been thrown. I was in the clear to home but was frightened all the way there. I went to the ranger station later the next morning and told the ranger. I knew there about what happened. He says, "So, you were attacked by Bigfoot?" Snidely laughing. "I don't know what it was, but something was trying to hurt me out there." "Okay, Justin, if I have any more Bigfoot, I'll let you know what we got." I just said fine and left. The very next week I was riding in the daylight when the PR pulled up next to me and said for me to get in. I asked why. He said he needed to show me something. We headed to the police department in town, and before we got out of the car, he turns to me and says, "Justin, I have to give you a huge apology. I will be honest that I didn't believe you when you told me the story of you being attacked. However, it has come to my attention that a couple was out in the same area last night and was attacked in the same way, saying they had seen a large, hairy creature throwing rocks and sticks and screaming at them. They called the police and they came out with some of the other rangers, including myself. I immediately thought about what you had told me. When we arrived and started up the hill, sure enough, we were having rocks and things thrown at us. Guns drawn and yelling, 2 officers tackled a man to the ground. He was 6'5", tall, naked, covered in mud and had long hair and a large beard. He had escaped from the Veterans Center across Veterans Lake, and apparently he thought he was back in Vietnam and he was trying to take out the enemy. PR said I was very lucky because he was trying to kill me. We went inside so I could give the police my statement as to what had happened. They had him sent to a more secure facility somewhere else. And to this day, I still get shivers when I hike that trail, and I always keep my eyes on the ridge top. I do feel bad for the ones with PTSD and such mental illnesses. But, Mr. Crazy Naked Bigfoot Man, let's not meet again.
Years ago, me, my family, and family friends would go camping at some cabins in Lake Placid, New York. Despite what happened that weekend, the campground holds very fond memories for me that I will cherish forever. The incident happened 4th of July weekend. My family was grilling, and me and my friends, children at the time, were running around and playing cops and robbers. While we played, the campground owner came over to my parents and offered to pay for some food. My parents, being nice, gave him food and beer for free. Eventually, the owner overstayed his welcome and was asked to leave by my friend's dad. This angered him, and he took off his shirt trying to fight him. None of us were aware that he was an alcoholic and was already drunk when he asked for food and beer. They eventually got him to leave, but after a while he came back, this time with his rifle. As me and my friends played, he walked around drunkenly trying to load the rifle. One of my friends, being an innocent kid, walked over to him and asked what he was doing. The owner said, "I'm going to show your dad something." One of the adults saw this and rushed over. My friend's dad took the rifle from his hands and threw it across the parking lot, screaming at him that there were kids around. At this point, I knew something bad was happening, and I rushed all of my friends over to inside our cabin. At this point, my dad called the police and was recording the whole thing. The police eventually came and arrested him. For the night, the campground owner tried to claim he had never had a rifle, even though we had him caught on video saying, "Give me my rifle." Police came back the next morning and let us file a temporary restraining order while we stayed the weekend. While this is an incident my family laughs at from time to time, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had gotten that rifle loaded. So, campground owner, let's not meet.
To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in my country, and that we don't have any so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. You can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, as long as once you leave the area is how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents, friends, and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There are always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was in the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip in spring of 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter of 2010. After picking her out that November from a shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. I know you guys love dogs, and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dog fighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my guess is Lurcher/Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her, or she'll have you. So by the time of this camping trip, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom. And I didn't mind. I wasn't that attached to the other kids, and I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we'd left a bit later, although I don't remember why we'd left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up, and the beach illuminated in campfires. But the beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and was trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window from the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of the year, and I wanted her to have air. Always gotta be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling about in the dark on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big zero shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining I was tired, as kids are wont to do, but my mom was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom's asking him, "Have you seen that car drive around? It's been a few times." My dad kinda shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more times, a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out here at this point, and I think my mom said that it must be security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him, and there was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool, a junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. And although I was small at that time, so maybe my sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him. Once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that was fine and that we'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying, and I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad, and possibly us as well, once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. But this isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black, like a wolf descending on its prey, took us all by surprise, most of all the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife as it had been in the arm she had got him by. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Parmy over as she was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I had left it. We think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap that I'd left for her, as it was an old car and had the rolly down windows and not an electric button. We think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. But this is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean up Parmesan up a little, and I'd always loved dogs. But what she just done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out of the window to get a better look at that sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart fucking sank. Parked in the corner behind the van so we hadn't seen him at first was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad, and without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was removed. The next town over was 60 miles away, and he didn't have that much petrol. We realized as we began driving. We were going to break down, and that's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night, better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 5 minutes, lights flashed us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized that we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life, and I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so it wouldn't upset us, but we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits, and we knew how dangerous the situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles, and we were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if He does exist, that was definitely one of His miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently, the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was the guy or just a random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her. So, what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me, it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills, and twice as grizzled as one of my mom's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I do know is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home she forgave, but never forgot. I think the saying is, I never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of the human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to adopt, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day, and I promise you, if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they are able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid 78 euros for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to my bones knowing that if I hadn't been so instant on a dog, I might be dead.
I want to start off this post by saying I was between the ages of say 10 to 12 when this happened. I don't remember exactly what year it was. I'm in high school now, so this was a few years ago. At my old apartment building complex, the parking lot was a circle. There was a staircase off of the parking lot down to a cement platform where kids could play, do sidewalk chalk, sports, etc. Cracked asphalt led through the woods to the other side of the neighborhood, which was regular single-family homes. One day, a man walked out of the woods and up both flights of stairs. He was wearing a full-body black Grim Reaper-style cloak and was making circles around the parking lot. My mom, who was a single mom, made the wise decision not to run any errands until he had left. Hours passed. 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. The cloaked man was still there, looping the parking lot. By this time, the sun was setting, and my dad came to pick me up after dinner to go to his house. When we got back, guess who was still there? The cloaked man. The sky was black, and the cloaked man was shrouded in darkness. Our HOA sucked, and all the streetlights were burned out. Our headlights illuminated him as we drove by. I saw him more clearly this time. His head bowed, the cloak completely covering his face. Hours had passed, and by the time I went to bed, the cloaked man was still wandering. He had been wandering the parking lot for the entire day. When I tell you this man was walking for at least 12 hours, this would not even be an exaggeration. And luckily, when I woke up the next day, he was gone without a trace. And I never saw him again.
This happened in the early 2000s, and I was probably in first grade or a year younger, and this was in Bulgaria. I am from a mid-sized town, not too small, not too big, the perfect one for raising your children. Crime is pretty much unheard of, and you can sleep outside on a bench and nothing would happen to you. One weekend, some family friends from a nearby town came to my town to visit, and my parents and I decided to go to the park with them. Now, it is important to say that all of the parks in my town are located right on the edge of town, so they are actually park/forest, and at some point, the park becomes a forest. Since it's not a very big town, we don't have central parks. In the park that we went to, it runs along a river, so it is a very narrow alley, but a very long one. And on one side there is a river, and on the other, there is a thick forest and cliffs. At that time, I didn't like the park so much because it was a very long walk, and you had to walk a lot to get to the end of it. So, like most kids, I got bored of walking with my parents and the other families since they were talking grown-up stuff, and I didn't want to listen to them. I decided to run off ahead, and by ahead, I mean out of sight from my parents. Keep in mind that this is a one-alley park, which you walk only straight forward with slight curves due to the river, so I had gone pretty far. Usually in this park, there are always people, and it's quite crowded on the weekends. But since it was summer, most people were on family vacations, and it was surprisingly empty, and I couldn't see anyone in a straight line in either way. At that point, I started hearing something in the forest, which was pretty loud since on the other side was the river and it was loud by itself. I stopped and started staring into the forest, and I saw how the bushes were moving and coming in my direction. I was still pretty clueless to what was happening until I saw a freaking man with long hair, a band across his forehead, dressed like a hunter with an air rifle on his back, running full speed towards me. There was no freezing moment. I just started running in the opposite direction and screaming my lungs out for my parents, hoping that they could hear me. But because of the river, I doubt that anyone could have heard me from 100 meters away. I remember looking backward and seeing him still chasing me, and I was thinking, okay, maybe this is the end. It's over. And then I was imagining how he would catch me and drag me into the forest, and I would never see my family and friends again. It felt like an eternity, but I finally saw my parents and our family friends. My whole face was red and I was crying and snotting like crazy, barely even breathing. The hunter also stopped running after he saw my parents and the others. And I remember my parents started screaming at him, like what the hell was he doing? I don't remember what he exactly said. I was just relieved that it was over. But I remember him shaking his head, like saying, I did nothing wrong. I was only trying to help him. The weirdest part was that there is no game in that park. It is a park after all, and the forest that he was hiding is a max 50 meters in width before the cliffs begin. So it is impossible to have any game there since there are always people walking there. You can see wild foxes, but that's about it. You need to go beyond the park out in the forest to hunt game. Also, it is highly illegal to carry a firearm out in public. We have very strict laws on firearms. Only police or military personnel are allowed to carry firearms. I don't know anyone who owns a gun. Civilians are allowed to register only air guns for hunting. No hardcore weapons allowed, and of course, you are not allowed to carry them in a park where there are people. Only in regulated zones for hunting game, away from populated zones. You would never see hunters like that unless you go to these zones, or you are in a village, which is still pretty rare. And no, we didn't report it afterward. It was too much of a hassle. This was the first and last time that something like that has happened to me. Thankfully, and I haven't developed fear from that place. Even now, when I go back to my town, I go running in that park after midnight, and I am perfectly fine. So, to the crazy hunter in the park, who was only trying to help me, let's never meet again. Idiot Hunter in the Woods by Sir_Sillypants. This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at that time and out deer hunting with my dad and a friend of his called Frank. I do remember this day like it was yesterday though. The dialogue isn't word for word, but the idea of it is 100% accurate. As a side note, it was one day after 8 people were shot less than 2 hours away. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 a square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I had been going with him since I was 5, up until that I was 12, which is the legal age to hunt with a rifle. I had just been tagging along. This particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m., so still dark outside. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 500 to 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. But not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of where they headed, maybe 200 yards away, roughly moving in my direction. I figured that they forgot something from the truck or something, so I radioed to see what they were doing. "We're sitting in my stand and Frank is about to head to the other one," he says. So obviously, this flashlight is someone else. This isn't super uncommon and isn't really a big deal, because those woods get crowded sometimes, and there's a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other hunter can see that there's someone there. He stops, and I see the light turn and go in a different direction. No big deal, right? And I end up dozing off while it's still dark out. When I wake up, the sun is up, and it's around 8 a.m. I sit there for a bit, radio my dad to see if he has heard or seen anything moving. But nothing yet. A couple gunshots off in the distance is all. I get up and go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, really, maybe 30 yards out and back, trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand, sit down, and take a real good look around. Nothing is really going on. I finally look out to my left where I had seen the flashlight before, and I see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radio my dad and Frank to see if either of them were moving around, and Dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank, so I grab the binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. It's definitely not. But this guy is looking at me through his scope, and his rifle is aimed directly at me. This is a huge no-no, a massive rule we all learn in hunter's education. Never point your rifle at something that you don't intend to shoot. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens. This is why normal people use binoculars. My first thought was, what a fucking dickbag. But the thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now, I am starting to panic, thinking that I'm going to be the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, staying behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand was on this kind of little knoll on the side of a much larger hill. I radio my dad and tell him what's up. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that, and I just had to keep looking. Every time that I looked at the guy, he was still aiming at my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like I would look, and he would go back to hiding, and then look again, and he would be 30 yards from where he was the last time. After 10 minutes of this goes by, when my dad radios me, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he was very obviously trying to keep me calm. And at that time, I thought he just wasn't taking me seriously. So I answered, "He's still here, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is." Dad told me just to keep hidden, and he'll figure it out, and that he will be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear the shot. I lost my shit trying to get a hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where the fuck is he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What the fuck is going on? And I sit there for maybe 2 to 3 minutes that felt like hours. "All right, come on out and head toward my stand." I peek up over the little knoll that I was behind and see my dad waving from along the ridge that the random guy had been on. I made the trek on over to him to see what happened. Turns out Frank was feeling a little restless and took a little stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that the stranger was on, not knowing that he was there. He had knocked his radio battery loose while he was getting situated earlier in the morning and had no idea anything was even going on. The shot that I heard was actually Frank shooting at a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us toward the logging road. We helped Frank out with his steer and decided to call it an early day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the week went on with no incidents. So, dumbass stranger in the woods with absolutely no common sense, let's never meet again. Not Going Into That Forest Anymore by U/No Big.
This happened to my roommate and I 2 years ago, when we drove into the national forest just outside of the town we live in. We go to a small college in New England, about 3 hours from any major city. For context, this forest has quite a few urban legends surrounding it, and the local community, although they don't go down there often, have a lot of superstitions about how to be safe while there. I had just broken up with my partner, and my roommate could sense that I was feeling down. Finals were just around the corner, so she decided to help me get my mind off of those things, and suggested we go to a nice spot she had found last week, and just chill and de-stress. We took a couple of beers with us and drove out to this secluded spot in the forest. From the moment we left the main asphalt road in the forest, I saw a couple of things that unsettled me. You could see the abandoned houses of a ghost town from the higher ground the road was on, and we could see this old doll hanging from a rope on a tree. Creepy shit. But we didn't really give it a second thought and just kept driving. We got to the clearing, parked our car behind some trees, popped open the back of our SUV, and started talking and playing music. About 10 minutes into this, 2 cars appeared from the road and parked in the clearing. My friend didn't pay them any attention, she just kept talking. But as I was facing them from where I sat, I couldn't stop seeing what they did. A guy popped out of each car, talked for a few minutes, and then I saw them take a long object covered in a dark plastic bag from the back of one of the cars. This is when I noticed that these guys had guns. Not like shotguns, which I often see in this town, but handguns. Then they started lighting the bag on fire. I told my friend to get down, and she turned around and saw them for the first time. Black smoke was rising from the bag, and between trying to keep my head down and steal glances at them, I saw them take out a second object. I heard them shoot at it, right before they set it on fire. I don't know how long my friend and I were lying there in silence, but it was definitely enough to let the terror sink in and whisper to each other how much we loved one another, just in case this was what we thought it was. At some point I looked up and saw that they were pointing at our car, and saw them walking into the woods, maybe trying to follow our tracks or trying to look for us. All I know is that right then I told my friend to jump into the driver's seat and make a run for it. I shut the back door, and between that and the car starting up, the guys heard it and started running towards us. They ran towards one of their cars and hopped in. We went over a hill and driving way above what was safe for dirt roads on the hillside, but we lost them. We drove to a neighboring town and roamed around for a while, just to make sure that no one was following us, before we went back to our dorm. That day we tried to make fun of the whole situation and got really drunk before finally breaking down and crying from knowing that we had seen something we weren't supposed to. We were at first terrified of telling anyone, but eventually we did tell the officers on campus, who contacted the police, but they never found anything.
Weird Encounter in the Forest by U/Caius_Casadas 2. So this happened to me a few years back in the summertime. Our house is located in a suburban area, and to the left of our house, the road ends at this small hill, after which there is a small footpath through a forest which I've used since I was a kid to get to school. The only time that I ever came across anyone else on that path was the occasional dog walker, and even that was quite rare. So this one evening that I was walking my dog along the path, and ahead of me, the path curved to the right, so straight ahead there was just vegetation. I was minding my own business, not really paying much attention to my surroundings, when I noticed an unusual black shape in the patch of blueberries, perhaps around 15 meters straight ahead of me. Once I had focused on what that was, I stopped straight in my tracks out of confusion. There was what appeared to be a person in full black clothing sitting in the bushes facing around 11 o'clock from my position. My dog was quiet and looking straight ahead of me, and the leash accidentally gave way as my finger released on the button, locking the leash in its place. This caused an audible and loud sound that made me cringe internally, though the figure in the trees gave no indication of having heard anything. There wasn't even any skin visible, as this person had a hood over their head, and I never once saw any movement coming from them, despite the fact that the sound made by the leash would have been easily audible from that distance. After maybe a minute of staring at the figure, I turn around and walk rather quickly out of there. I still have no clue who that was exactly and what they were doing just sitting in full black clothing in a forest in summertime like that. Maybe it was just a depressed kid or something, but it definitely creeped me out in that circumstance. And ever since, I've been quite wary of using that path in the dark after that encounter. Psycho from the Woods by U/Unwanted Galaxy.
This incident occurred at what I would say was an approximate 2 to 3 years ago, a short time before a friend introduced me to the exact same place in the summertime. We had a group of friends who all met at a summer house in the mountains in upstate, usually a day or two after school had ended. It was a generally super safe place, but sadly was near a small town who had quite the bit of crime. And the town was an approximate 10-minute car drive away from the road of the summer houses we all stayed at. We were completely surrounded by forest. A few miles away was a prison. We usually were never uncomfortable walking alone at night or playing manhunt in the late night hours, but unfortunately, everything changed in just one moment. I'm thankful I was not there to witness it all take place. So a few years ago, we were all playing manhunt in the very late hours, about 11 PM. We had about 8 people in the game, and the 2 teams set off into the darkness of the nearby forest to hide from the hunter. The hunter-killer, I would prefer not sharing her real name, so we will refer to her as Sophia, set off in search of the players. One person who I will refer to as James decided before not to play this game and went to his house, which was about 3 car lengths away from the starting point of the game, and he went to bed. In about 20 minutes of the game, Sophia noticed a dark figure in black running across the field to the opposite tree, and she, assuming it was who she had to catch, came bolting after the person, ignoring a flash of silver in their hand. As she reached the person, she had directly bumped into them and was shoved to the ground before the person quickly dove into the safety of the trees and back into the woods. Sophia, in confusion, called each of the players back to the starting point to ask which one of them was the person running. No one had answered, but one of the players, who we will call Alex, noticed the man too. Alex pointed out that no one in our entire camp was that tall, which sent worry down Sophia's chest. The group decided it was best to call it a night, and went to bed and locked their doors. In the morning, James had woken up to find his door handle busted and food scattered all over the floor, which he quickly told the owner of the line of our summer houses. Alex and the owner, Adam, investigated the house, Alex holding a large kitchen knife and Adam holding an axe. But the person was gone. Strangely, no one ever notified the authorities on this, and what I found interesting is that we all continued to go back to the summer home, regardless of the incident, and even left most of our stuff there waiting for us for next year. So, super creepy tall person who came out of the woods, let's not meet ever again. And if we do, we're gonna whoop your ass.
The Someone or Someone's in the Woods by u/Lost in the Pine. I joined Reddit today pretty much to tell this story. I've told the story to my roommates who are from the same town, and I've talked about it a few times with some of the people who were there, but that's it. I don't even like to talk about it because inevitably someone will say, "Really? We should go and try to find it again." And I don't really want to. I've looked for it on a map a few times, but I can't find it through Google's aerial maps. Though, my male friend who drove there that night swears that he has the directions memorized. Anyway, I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of the town, there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country/bumpkin/redneck/grit part of town. It's not even in the same county, but it's part of the general area that my city is thought of as. In the woods there's this legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists do rituals now, or a Satanist church that burned down by a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are a number of Hell's Church myths in Ohio in many different places, but this one was closest to us, and a number of my guy friends decided that they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around the area we lived in. We were juniors in high school, and while all of us obviously thought that this was just stupid bullshit, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, most people had cars or driver's licenses by now, so we were enjoying a new burst of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this, but I was the most tomboyish girl in the group and always kind of wanted to be able to hang out with the guys. Plus, some of the girls in the group who I was closer to were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser or a pussy. So one day in November, we decided we are going to go out one night and try and find this church. We had actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew, so after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church, supposedly just a chimney at this point. We hadn't found the church, to our disappointment. We took 2 cars out there, going past more populous parts of our city and back to this woody area. I can't honestly tell you how we got out there, but I know it's off State Highway, then an abandoned access road, past some old warehouse, and then down a dirt road. Once you get down the dirt road, there's a kind of thicker part of the road early on where we parked cars off of the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. And also, someone clearly owns this land, and later down the road, there is some no trespassing signage. I'm sure a ton of kids come back here, so it didn't seem odd to me that they wanted to block this place off. I barely thought twice about it at that time. We get out of our cars and start walking down the dirt road, wandering off the path from time to time to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old or whatever. But then the barns started to get weirder. Like they were filled with weird spray painting symbols and bullshit. But that's not what bothered us. We figured whoever was there before us did it, which I still 100% believe. But there were also other stuff, like dead owls that looked like they had been opened up, though they were dried out and decomposed by the time we got there. And also other bits that looked like they might have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that these probably came from the same teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual, or that the animals got trapped in the falling apart barn and died in there. My friends are now hardcore trying to find the stupid chimney, so they keep taking off through the trees into the clearings. Myself and the other two girls who were there kind of hang back on the tree line for most of them, getting a little more nervous and a little irritated with all the coming up empty. As we keep going, we find a bike on the tree line, like a bike that maybe a 12-year-old would ride. That's a little creepy, but fine, whatever. Probably belonged to someone who owned the land. We decide we are going to go a little further, and soon enough, we find another bike. This one is older, a little rusted, but still undersized. We didn't talk too much about the other bike, just kind of mumbling that it's probably still nothing. One or two of the 4 guys who were there are kind of trying to pump it up, saying, "These kids probably got murdered," or stuff like that, but no one is really having it. By this point, we've been here for about 2 hours and it's getting really late. Plus, I think we're all a little more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decide to head back to the cars, and I'm feeling relieved, happy to be headed back to my house and fuck out of here. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we see a road that goes straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there's a big metal gate that had "A road closed" sign on it, which we had seen before. But for some reason, it had never occurred to us to try and go up that road. We had a small debate at the gate about an evenish split of who wanted to venture up and who didn't. I absolutely didn't. But eventually, we decide we'll go up just to see. Both of the drivers want to go, so there's not a lot we can do about it. We climb over the gate and start up the hill, where an old pavement road is cracked and crumbled under our feet, though it was for sure a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road condition and the brush being an obstacle, someone had fallen a bunch of trees over the path, purposely blocking off the road from any cars. Some of us are starting to seriously question if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously wanted to keep us out of here. But we get teased for being afraid and keep going. I couldn't see where the road would end because it was so dark and the trees made it hard to see. We did have a few flashlights, but it wasn't really doing us much good. Plus, the road was super steep, so all you could really see was up, with a little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden, though, we reach the end. The trees just open up, and we have come off the incline to a flat field. And holy fuck, what a sight it was. It's the flat field with the tall prairie grass on either side, probably 2 to 3 feet high, and pretty uniform. The path we are on splits the large clearing we are in down the center and leads through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. Two look like they are farmhouses, with one barnished building. They were wood, and while they may have been painted at one point, it looked like they had been mostly weathered and stripped by time. I see this, and I am done. I want to leave. But of course, some of my friends say that we have to check out these buildings. At this point, I finally put down my foot as the other two girls and one of our guy friends, who decided that this is enough for him. He was actually our valedictorian, so maybe he was just smarter. So the three guys who want to go to the buildings tell us just to wait here, and while we don't want to be in this field out in the open, we decide we can't just leave them. At this point, we've turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The three of them take off down the little path, and the four of us who remain stand together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and also making small talk. None of us say it, but we are all looking to the grass every now and again, worried something is going to jump out. It's just so creepy, this little abandoned settlement. It feels like our friends are gone forever, and we see them get to a building and go inside. It was unlocked, I guess. We can see the flicker of their flashlight lights in the windows, and I just remember feeling so tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After 10 minutes, we see our guy friends coming towards us, lightly jogging and looking afraid for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside?" I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looks at us, and I will never forget it. It was full of bikes. Just bikes chained to the walls. We didn't believe them, kept waiting for them to say that they were kidding, but they insisted, said it was just like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there, most of them smaller. They looked afraid, and as much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. They aren't the type of guys to pull a prank for this long. By then, we can all agree that we need to get the fuck out of there, and we start downhill hurrying the best we can. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we can see a car's headlights down the hill about where our cars are. We see them pass slowly, and we know something is down there looking for us. Because it's so far off the beaten path, we figure it's one of two things. One, the cops, and we are going to be fucked for trespassing. And number two, the people who own this land or these houses or something, and they are going to A, call the cops, or B, murder us. We know that the road isn't that long, so they'll be turning around, circling back soon enough. And because our cars are there, they'll probably wait for us. We are all whispering about this as we pick up the pace, sprinting down the hill as fast as we can. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling ass, getting down as fast as I could, basically hurdling over the fallen trees. Once we get down the hill, we don't see any headlights, but we know they can't be far away. "Get in the fucking cars!" one of our friends yells, and we are fumbling with the doors like a horror movie, just too nervous to get into the cars. We get in, and just as we start the cars up, we see the headlights speeding down the road and a giant black truck roaring up behind us. The truck seemed larger than life, raised up off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying, but extra terrifying was that we couldn't see who was driving in the dark, and with the headlights blinding us, we peel out of there, total pedal to the metal. This truck is still following us, bearing down on us as our two cars race out of there. And this car is also getting really close to us, threateningly close, almost like it was trying to run us off the road. We were all screaming, looking back at the truck and fighting for some distance. Once we get to the highway, we are switching lanes trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedan, so it was easy for us to weave in and out of cars. But this truck was still chasing us. We are in 2 different lanes but don't want to get separated from our friends. The passengers of both cars are texting back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much or if they turned around, but once we got to a big shopping center area, we ducked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a little bit, watching to make sure that we weren't going to get snuck up on before getting out of the car to get some food and talk. Everyone, even the guys who had tried to act tough the whole time, was pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down enough to head home. As much as we talked over, we just couldn't figure out what had happened. Eventually, we all went home, during what was a pretty silent car ride, exhaustion and lingering fear taking over. We didn't talk about it again for a long time, and we have never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall really. But when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was that town abandoned? Who owned those bikes? And where are they now? A strange man hunted me through a national park by u/Valerian Jedi. I was camping in the middle of nowhere in Washington near Mount Rainier. Like not an official campground, just way out in the forest where I wouldn't have expected another human being for miles. One night, I wake up and hear something. I open my tent, and there is a guy sitting by where my fire had been right outside my tent. Nothing particularly noteworthy about the guy, just a fairly regular looking dude, and just sitting there a couple of feet from my tent. No bag or pack or anything with him, just a guy. He saw me open the tent, and his eyes got huge like he had just seen a ghost, and then he took off. It shook me up pretty badly, but over the next day, I managed to put it out of my mind fairly well after writing it off as just some odd occurrence and a guy that was probably high or something and had somehow managed to set up a camp coincidentally not far from mine. Then 2 days after that, and 10 to 15 miles away in a totally random direction that nobody could take the same path as on accident, I was sitting by the fire that night and started hearing noises that I got more and more convinced were a person. I call out to them, and out of the darkness someone was like, "Do you know how to get to Bell's Canyon?" I said no. I don't even think that's a real place there. And they kept talking from just out of my line of vision. I tried to see them with my flashlight, but they yelled, "Aim that away!" I got kind of spooked, but not wanting to piss off a potentially crazy person, so I did. And after like 15 minutes of me being very freaked out, and them talking and asking completely random directions from the darkness, it sounded like the voice had gotten closer, so I shined my light that way again. And it was the same dude who had been outside my tent 2 nights before. He had to have followed me almost 15 miles over 2 days because there is no way that he could have just accidentally wound up in the same spot as vast as that wilderness is. No possible way. And as soon as my light hit him, he took off again. I started to chase him, but I didn't want to get lost in the wilderness in the dark, so I stopped quickly after probably only 100 to 200 feet. This one couldn't be written off because the only way he could have been in both places is specifically if he was following me. I decided the trip was very over the first thing in the morning, and I hiked back out over 3 days, constantly doubling back, trying to throw anyone following off my trail, and occasionally hiding and waiting to see if he would come by following me. I really can't describe how terrifying it was to feel like I was being hunted through the woods, and to actually have to brainstorm on things that I could do to best avoid potentially being murdered. On the first night of hiking out, twice I heard what sounded like a person walking in circles outside of my tent, but by the time that I mustered the courage to look, nobody was there. On the second night, I heard what I thought was an animal making noises at first, and in the distance, but slowly decided that it sounded more like a human making animal calls, but could have actually been an animal. I don't know, I didn't actually see the guy again, but it really sounded like a person making howling noises. I literally almost cried when I finally got back to my car because the relief was so strong. And to this day, this is probably the most terrifying experience that I have ever had. I have no idea who that guy was or what his intentions were, and no way of getting an explanation. But I really can't articulate just what a terrifying few days it was. Strange Happenings in the Mountains of Washington State by U/Alexander Robb. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least, as a crow flies from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So, when we got to the campsite, a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put the tent up, make dinner, or etc. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up the steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up, and barking. Not the type of bark when he sees marmots, not the excited way of saying, "Oh, you motherfuckers are lucky because I'd rip you all apart if my master wasn't here." You know, those high-pitched barks. But these sounded like unsure, concerned barks. Now, the day before, I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago. And I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before, so I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement, and before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So, while still concerned, I start hiking up this steep hill to hang the bag, It was so steep that I had to use the trees to balance and lean against on so that I didn't go tumbling down, before making another 5-6 step push to the next tree that I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making it up the hill or ridge, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill, and I hear a whole lot of big movement about 5 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep low growl to a savage slubber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in a matter of seconds. Because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try to save me, in which he will most likely die. And I'm stuck here. If I have to get off that hillside fast, I almost 100% am going to trip and fall off the 12 to 15 feet cliff and onto the boulders below. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. Then I hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down at my campsite, which is just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent so she didn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I am absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds after, I kinda snap back to it, and I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog Loki back to me. He comes and sits against my feet as my back is against a tree, so I'm kinda pinned or stuck there for a moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I try to collect myself. This is when I realized that I had completely forgot that I had my headlamp on. I reached up so fast to turn my lamp on that I basically punched myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline pumps going right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection of the eyes of whatever is up there, peering. I kept peering, but nothing. But I had just heard something. We both did, and whatever it was didn't get away, or sound like it had made it too far. I knew something was there, so I'm kinda just steadfast at this point. I need to know what is up there because I have to sleep here tonight. And you know, I'm out in the middle of nowhere alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night is my thought process. So yeah, as I'm looking up this hill, and at one point, my dog lunges forward and pinning me. He does a fake bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean, he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon or sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. So I'm zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch, and what I make out made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy shit with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly, almost like a makeshift guile suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew we were staring right at each other at that moment. So I stare for what seems like minutes, no words at all. And I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground, and I wanted him to know that I saw him. But I guess I was just too shaken to speak. As I am staring, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared. And I also had to get off that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt or risk dying trying to get back down. So, carefully, I start heading down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my dog against a tree holding me up and look in that direction again, just to make it even more clear that I saw him. And eventually, I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time that I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders, and I thought she was barking just to bark, or just barking back at my dog. But when I got there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling with her tail sticking straight out. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out. But I was positive that I had zipped it so the zipper tapper openings was at the very top of the tent door and definitely out of her reach. So in a mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my shit and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks. It was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time that I had made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle. But thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around a fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They start to tell me that they are planning to head that way where I was the night before in the morning, so I tell them my story in detail. Needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all of that. The thing that still creeps me out till this day, though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike that I was on. Other people had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered last year. Terrifying Cave in the Middle of Nowhere by you/Ms. Robin Hood. What I'm about to tell you is the reason that I will never, ever enter a cave for the rest of my life, and why I will never leave the house without telling someone where I'm going first. 11 years ago, when I was still in college, my boyfriend and I were invited to go explore a cave with a couple that we've never met before. They both seemed nice enough, but their Jeep was a little ghetto. Keep in mind that my boyfriend and I didn't tell anyone where we were going, and there was no cell service out in the middle of nowhere, and especially not in that cave. They drove us 4 hours away from my college town into the middle of nowhere in a place in Kentucky that I've never gone to before. And still to this day, I have no idea where that cave was located, even though I've tried several times to locate it on the internet and ask all of my friends. Anyway, we parked the car in a forest with no houses in sight, and they led us to a cliff with a tiny hole in the side, just big enough for me to slide into on my stomach. And before we entered, the couple put black latex gloves on, which really struck me as odd. They led the way and we slid through the tiny tunnel on our stomachs for what felt like 20 minutes, which made me quite claustrophobic until we got to a little room the size of a large closet, just tall enough to sit in. I don't know why, but the guy lit a fire which quickly filled the chamber with smoke, which was a little creepy. And I saw that he had a rope and a knife in his backpack. So we continued sliding on our stomachs for 10 more minutes down the cave tunnel until we finally entered a huge cavern with ceilings covered in stalactites 2 stories high. The cave went on forever and ever, and we walked and walked and walked in complete darkness with only 2 flashlights. And to my horror, I realized that the guy was holding a rock and kept looking back at me, and the girl was carrying a knife. At one point, the couple had made my BF and I lead the way, and we almost walked right into a deep hole. When I threw a rock into it, it felt like it fell forever until I heard it hit the bottom far below. I looked back to see the 2 strangers or couples whispering to each other, and the girl said, "Should we do it now?" They look up and see that I am watching them, and I see the man look to the girl and shake his head. Were they planning something bad? So we head down another path, and by this time, we've been lost for hours. But we finally find spray-painted arrows pointing that say, "Exit." But after a while, we realize that these arrows were made by some pranksters who put the arrows everywhere just to make people lost. Finally, I'm the first to see twilight at the end of a large tunnel, and we make it outside into the real world. I will never go anywhere with strangers, and I'll never go back into a cave. And I will never go anywhere without telling someone where I'm going. I swear, it's true, and I reported it to my campus security in around 2010. And they still haven't gotten back with me. The Night the Woods Stood Silent by U/Non-Gene Regret. Years ago, man, I am old, but let's say mid-1990s, I worked as a woodland firefighter while in the Army Reserves. I worked as a spotter. Basically, I was stationed in a giant fire tower in the middle of a national park. My job was just as it sounds. I would use binoculars and look out for fire, smoke, other telltale signs of fire. And my nearest compadre was 5 miles or so from me. My days consisted of working my shift, taking long walks around the fire tower, being on a lookout for anyone who might be having illegal fires, looking out for wildlife, and staying afoot of bears and wolves. The way our shifts worked back then was 1 week on, 1 week off. So we slept in the towers, cooked our food, and etc. There were nearby toilets and showers for us to use. One day, I came across an illegal bear trap, and I had several ranger friends. So I safely set off the trap, then picked it up to take to the ranger station on one of my treks out for food in my Jeep. Poaching is illegal in the park and carried a big fine even back then and some jail time, but that did not stop poachers from trying. I heard rifle shots and headed back for my fire tower. We did have a rifle in the tower to be used in cases of emergencies. Just a few months back, a fellow spotter had been mauled to death by a grizzly, so each tower had been outfitted with a rifle. I looked with my binoculars, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So I radioed my coworker Ben, who was an older guy in the adjacent tower. He hadn't heard anything today, but had came across a few traps himself. That night, after a dinner of frank and beans and toast, I was writing to my future wife when I heard the rumbling of a truck. thinking it may be Ben, because occasionally he made the trek over and we would crack open a soda and chew the fat for a bit. But instead, I saw 4 men with rifles get out of their truck. One looked around and leaned up against the truck, while the other 3 grabbed traps and began to set them up. I grabbed the rifle and my lantern and headed down the stairs. I was only 21, a farmer's son from a rural Virginia farming town, and even with 1 deployment behind me, I was naive. I should have called it into the Rangers, but instead, I thought that I could talk some sense into 4 dangerous men. I barely got a, "Hey, what are you doing?" out of my mouth before I was roughly shoved by rough hands. My lantern fell and I heard it crack. The rifle was kicked away from me and I felt the breath leave my chest when I was violently kicked in my stomach. I barely had caught my breath when I was grabbed by 2 of the men and was shoved forward into the woods. It seemed like we walked for miles, but in reality, it was probably only a mile. However, I noticed that there were no sounds. In the forest, it is rarely silent. It's a cacophony of sounds even at night. Owls, wolves, crickets, but on this night, nothing. Suddenly, I was shoved onto my knees and I felt hot tears well up. I thought about my parents, my little sister and brother and my fiancé who were back home in Virginia. But I heard the rack of a gun and I shut my eyes and prayed, and suddenly the night erupted. However, it was the sounds of sirens, those of the forest rangers, and behind them in his pickup was Ben, who had tried to radio me that he had heard a car's engine and came to my tower when I didn't reply. The poachers were arrested, and Ben drove me back to the tower. I was still shaking. He didn't lay into me for not following procedure, and just said, "That was close, kid." I ended up leaving the job months later to take a job closer to home, but I never ran into any more poachers during the rest of my time. I kept in contact with Ben for a while, sent him a wedding invite and a photo of my firstborn son in 1997. However, as time usually does, we lost track of one another, and a few years back I Googled him. He would have been 75 or so, but only to discover that he had passed away a few years back. I don't know whatever came of those poachers, but I know that I never want to meet them ever again. Weird horse cuffing in the woods at 1 a.m. I think somebody tried to follow us. By u/ILY Tinder 3W. For context, I live pretty far out in the middle of nowhere, and last night my brother visited me. We planned to drink but eventually ended up taking a late night stroll in the woods because why not? We did this plenty of times before, just with the difference that we usually hang out at his new place downtown, where there's no such thing as large wooded areas. So yeah, we were pretty excited to go into the forest for a change. As we were making our way up the hill and lost in some deep conversation, my brother abruptly stopped in his tracks. But before he could even explain himself, I knew exactly what he had heard. I heard it as well the second time. There was a quiet yet very distinct wet horse coughing, and it sounded like it wasn't too far away, maybe about a couple feet. Remember, it was past 1 a.m. and like I said, this is the middle of nowhere. It is extremely rare to run across another person in these woods, even at daytime. So without reconsidering once, we were like, "Hell no," and turned around and got the hell out of there. However, the weird shit didn't stop there. As we were finally back on the narrow dirt road leading home, we saw a bright light about a yard behind us. At first, we thought it was someone riding their bike with some kind of single light attached to it, when we realized that the light didn't move at all. In fact, it only seemed to get brighter to the point where it looked more like an actual truck headlight than your average flashlight. We eventually pointed our own flashlight back at it for a few seconds before the strange light went out just as suddenly as it had came on. I'm not sure we heard anything after that, but at that point, all we wanted was to get inside and away from whoever was out there with us. We had also heard some demonic screeching coming from somewhere in the woods at the same time, but I'm pretty sure it was just a male deer trying to attract a mate. Great timing. Well, anyway, that's it for today. I just thought that I'd share this creepy encounter on here. Weird things that I've noticed living in the woods. By you/Frogs are cool, you fool. So, I live in the middle of the woods. Trees are all around, and me and my family live on a small farm. We have goats and chickens and some plants, so it's honestly barely a farm. We have been living here for about 2 years now, and I would like to share some of the odd things that have happened around. 1. The cabin about a mile behind our house that gives me very bad vibes. The man who lives there 2 weeks ago was driving his car towards my little sister as she was walking on the driveway, and he was calling her to come over to him. Number 2. The large pile of bones that me and my little sister found on the same neighbor's property. This included dog teeth. Number 3. Home life is quite bad, and so I go walk in the woods to blow off some steam and to cope. I was quite upset and crying and walking in the woods for a very long time. I have troubles with disassociation when I experience trauma or feel overwhelmed, and I'm not completely sure how I got there. But I ended up on a large farm. I had never seen this farm before, and although I have only lived there for 2 years, I feel that I know most of the roads. The farm was quite deep into the forest, and there were fruit trees and a barn, but I saw no house when I looked around. It started creeping me out, and I was scared that I would get in trouble, so I left and tried to find my way back home. Number 4. We have an outdoor cat, and every time we go into the right part of the woods on our neighbor's property, he would always follow us, but never when we go on the left side. Number 5. I was camping in my backyard and heard weird noises. I had my dog with me because I didn't want to be outside alone, and he was whining and seemed kind of disturbed. It might have been an animal or something, but I'm not sure. I heard some kind of mixture between a moan and a howl, and it didn't sound like any creature that I have ever heard. And lastly, last week we had a campfire at night, and I had just come out and my little sister was freaking out like the Nancy Drew she is. And when I came, I heard it too. We heard a radio, and although it could have come from someone driving by, the sound did not seem to come from that direction. It seemed to be instead coming from the woods. It seemed quite loud and I grabbed my flashlight to investigate. But right when I approached the forest, it stopped. I don't think it was a car, because if it was one, then we would have heard it slowly grow quiet and we saw no headlights. The radio was very loud, then just turned off. I highly doubt that any of this is paranormal, because it could probably be easily explained. But such experiences freaked me out and definitely left me feeling unsettled. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.